Jacek Pivovarczyk and Cynthia Lee. English in My Backpack. Volume 4. Indonesia. Buddhist Fat Ho Memorial College. 2011. Preface.
When Jacek enthusiastically passed me the fourth book of the English in My Backpack series, I proudly told him that I had been to Indonesia many times, so that I would be able to fondly recall similar experiences as those I thought he would share in the book. However, I was shocked when I found out that what I knew about was only a tiny part of Indonesia. I didn't even recognize a single photo that Jacek had taken in the country, even though I had been to Indonesia quite a few times. Once again, he has shown me the real meaning of traveling, which will definitely lead to a better understanding of the people and culture of that country. I sometimes wonder, after reading this book, whether I have ever actually been to Indonesia before. After reading the manuscript, mixed feelings rush over me. On the one hand, I feel ashamed to tell people that I have traveled to Indonesia many times, and on the other hand, I feel happy that my understanding of one of my favorite countries has been broadened by Jacek and Cynthia. Now I really understand the meaning of seeing without looking. Walking 10,000 miles gives you more knowledge than reading 10,000 books. This Chinese saying is particularly true in terms of the liberal studies and other learning experiences component of the NSS curriculum. Not many students know that Indonesia is the fourth most populated nation in the world, and that, quote, it is also one of the world's most diverse countries, geographically, ethnically, and culturally. This book gives you a clear understanding of this multi-ethnic country. If you have an Indonesian friend at school or an Indonesian helper at home, you will have a lot of common topics to share after you read this book. I enjoy the book a lot, and I am sure you will all agree with me. Get yourself ready to travel to Indonesia. I am sure you will have lots of fun. Principal UN Fooklong.
Table of Content. Introduction.
The fourth volume of the English in My Backpack series brings you to Indonesia. With 18,110 islands, 6,000 of them inhabited, it is the largest archipelago in the world and the fourth most populous nation. At the same time, it is also one of the world's most diverse countries, geographically, ethnically, and culturally. With its ancient temples of Bali and Java, pristine beaches, spectacular volcanoes, lush tropical vegetation, and exceptional ethnic customs and architecture, Indonesia is an incredibly interesting tourist destination. Almost every island is somehow unique, and traveling from one to another always brings new experiences and a great deal of pleasure, surprise, and excitement. The pictures used in this book were taken during my 3 trips to Indonesia, undertaken during the course of 25 years, between 1987 and 2010. Additional pictures come from another trip to Bali in 2014. So let's begin our fascinating journey to the land of many lands, how the country is sometimes called.
In the arena of human life, the honors and rewards fall to those who show their good qualities in action. Aristotle. Java. Geography. With a population of 136 million, Java is the most populous island in the world. Located between Sumatra to the west and Bali to the east, it is an island of nearly entirely volcanic origin. A long chain of over 35 volcanic mountains creates its east-west spine. The highest of them is Mount Semeru, 3,676 meters in the east, and the most active, the famous Mount Merapi, 2,968 meters, near the town of Yogyakarta. Thanks to its incredibly fertile volcanic soil, high rainfall, and lots of suitable land, Java is one of the world's richest rice-growing regions in the world. Jakarta. With a population over 15 million, Jakarta is a huge, bustling, and rather chaotic modern metropolis, and the capital city of Indonesia. It is also a political, cultural, and economic center of the country. Jakarta is a city of wide boulevards, filled with slow-moving vehicles, modern, fashionable architecture, iconic mosques, grand monuments, and busy shopping malls. Regrettably, only a very small part of the original Dutch colonial settlement, Old Batavia, has been retained, a few buildings restored and converted into interesting historical museums. Sunda Kelapa Harbor, the old spice-trading seaport, is where the city's history began. The best time to venture there is early in the morning, when groups of porters carefully climb narrow and steep wooden planks, diligently loading and unloading majestic wooden schooners built by the Bugis people of Sulawesi. Sea transport has always played an important role in the Indonesian economy, and for centuries, these fabulous ships have been tirelessly delivering goods to even the most remote ports of the archipelago. Sunda Kelapa is a fascinating place to visit. There is also a 19th century Dutch watchtower overlooking the river nearby, a maritime museum, and the colorful Pasar Ikan, or fish market, held in the morning in the narrow lanes. The slender Monas Monument at Merdeka Square is one of the most recognizable landmarks of Jakarta. Yogyakarta. Located at the foot of the active and persistently dangerous Merapi volcano, Yogyakarta, or simply Yogya, is the cultural, spiritual, and educational capital of Indonesia. It is a bustling and sprawling city of 500,000 people and one of the most popular destinations in the country. More than 1,000 years ago, from the 8th to the early 10th centuries, Yogyakarta was the center of the ancient Mataram Kingdom. This prosperous and highly civilized kingdom built Borobudur Temple, which was the biggest Buddhist temple in the world, Prambanan, and dozens of other elaborate stone monuments. 600 years later, the area again became a center of another Mataram kingdom, ruled by the powerful Islamic dynasty, whose influence extends until the present day. Taman Sari. One of the most mysterious remnants of the past are the ruins of Taman Sari, the water garden. Built in the middle of the 18th century, it once was a royal pleasure garden of lakes, pools, palaces, and canals that served for the first sultan and his family. Suddenly abandoned after the sultan's death, the complex was subsequently destroyed by the war and the huge earthquake of 1865. Only a small part of the huge palace has been partially restored. The rest is an intriguing maze of dilapidated, narrow, dusty alleys, underground passageways, ornamented arches, and small halls, many of them used by locals as shops and homes. Kraton. Right in the heart of the city, enclosed by a huge white wall, stands the Kraton, or Sultan's Palace, an over 2-century-old palace complex and Yogyakarta's prime tourist attraction. The compound is a splendid collection of fabulous private mansions, ceremonial chambers, a magnificent throne hall, small pavilions, a mosque, barracks, courtyards planted with banyan trees, and narrow lanes, everything superbly preserved and restored. The most central part of the palace, built in the middle of 18th century, is where the current sultan and his family still resides. Borobudur. Located 40 kilometers northwest of Yogyakarta lies Borobudur, the largest Buddhist monument in the world. This magnificent, imposing ancient stupa was constructed by the Sailendra dynasty between 778 and 856 AD, 300 years before the famous temple of Angkor Wat in Cambodia. Built on the holy confluence of two rivers and shaped in the form of a giant mandala, Borobudur was used for veneration, worship, and meditation. Soon after its completion, after the fall of the Sailendras, the temple was completely abandoned and forgotten. Buried under layers of volcanic ash from 1,000 years of Merapi's eruptions and covered with tropical vegetation, Borobudur was rediscovered to the world by an English colonel in 1914.
A visit to Borobudur was one of the most anticipated experiences of my life. The weather was excellent. The sky was azure blue, and a few cotton-like cumulus clouds created perfect photographic conditions. My only worry was a noisy crowd that usually invades the temple, making the visit much less enjoyable. Luckily, my trip to Borobudur coincided with the month of Ramadan and the complex was nearly deserted. After a few minutes' walk through the park, I stood at the foot of the main stairs leading to the stupa. I climbed the stairs and just in front of me stood one of humanity's most imposing creations. I could now have a closer look. Borobudur is comprised of 6 square platforms topped by 3 circular platforms. The square platforms are decorated with over 2,600 relief panels and 504 life-sized Buddha statues. The main dome, located at the center of the top platform, is surrounded by 72 Buddha statues seated inside a perforated dome. Borobudur is like a gigantic stone Buddhist textbook. I was incredibly impressed by the grandeur of the temple and the unparalleled beauty of the reliefs, so I decided to set myself off for an over 5-kilometer pilgrim's walk to read the textbook, slowly circling each platform in a clockwise direction, contemplating and taking pictures of the most interesting reliefs.
Since 1991, Borobudur is listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Borobudur contains the largest and the most complete collection of Buddhist reliefs in existence. In fact, these images make up a virtual textbook of Mahayana Buddhism doctrine carved in stone. Some 1,500 panels of the temple are dedicated to Buddha's teachings. The rest have a purely decorative, ornamental function. The first 2 series of reliefs depict Buddhist fables and fairy tales. Others illustrate the life story of Gautama Buddha, his quest for wisdom, and finally achievement of supreme knowledge and ultimate truth. Many images show different aspects of Javanese life over 1,000 years ago, including clothing styles, family life, agriculture, martial arts, customs, architecture, and dancing. Questions and language arts. Prambanan. Right in the center of a fertile volcanic plain, 17 kilometers east of Yoja, lies Prambanan, a vast Hindu temple complex. Built in middle of the 9th century by the Hindu Sanjaya dynasty, it is the largest Hindu temple in Indonesia and is one of the largest Hindu temples in Southeast Asia. Like in the case of other temples in the region, Prambanan was abandoned and deserted a few years after its completion. Over the centuries, the imposing stone structures deteriorated and eventually collapsed during a major earthquake in the 16th century. A few reconstruction projects took place in the last century, and the work still continues due to numerous earthquakes that frequently occur in this area. In 1991, Prambanan was added to the UNESCO World Heritage List. The site is very clean and extremely well maintained. There is an open-air stage where beautifully choreographed dance and light and sound Ramayana performances take place on moonlit nights between May and October. Prambanan Temple. Prambanan Temple is an extraordinarily beautiful main temple complex standing in the central courtyard. It contains 8 major towering structures and 8 minor ones enclosed by a stone wall. Prambanan is the masterpiece of Hindu culture of the 10th century and is considered as one of the most beautiful Hindu temples in the world. The main tower, the magnificent soaring 47-meter-tall Chandi Shiva Mahadeva, is dedicated to Shiva, the destroyer. For over 1,000 years, it was the tallest structure on Java. Accessible by very steep, narrow stone stairs, the main chamber contains a 3-meter-high statue of the 4-armed god Shiva. The tower is lavishly decorated with statues, panels of dancing figures, and celestial musicians, as well as other elements, all perfectly balanced and elaborately restored. The main terrace encircling the temple is embellished with realistic reliefs describing the story of Ramayana, carved on the inner walls of the balustrades. Similarly to Borobudur, the story needs to be read in a clockwise direction. The two other main towering shrines are dedicated to Vishnu, the preserver, and Brahma, the creator. They are both 33 meters tall and are beautifully decorated. The temples were designed to resemble Mount Meru, the holy mountain where Hindu gods reside. The whole complex is a model of Hindu universe. Sewu Temple. Sewu is a 9th century Buddhist temple located 800 meters north of Prambanan. In fact, it is a large complex consisting of one large central stupa and 250 smaller temples. Its symmetrical shape was supposed to generate harmony in the kingdom, creating the shape of a mandala, a miniature replica of the world. The name Chandi Sewu means the 1,000 temples. The entrances to the temple are guarded by 2 meters tall demons, lower right photo, armed with swords. Compared to the other Prambanan temples, Sewu is a very peaceful place. Unfortunately, it was quite severely destroyed during the 2006 earthquake and is now undergoing major restoration works. Parangtritis. Parangtritis is a small coastal town less than 1 hour drive south of Yogyakarta. It is a wonderful long stretch of black volcanic sand backed by hills and towering vertical cliffs. Parangtritis is incredibly popular during weekends and holidays, when thousands of picnickers and beach lovers descend there, turning it into a busy swarm. However, the beach is almost completely deserted during the month of Ramadan, the time for reflecting, believing, and worshiping God, when Muslims should refrain from eating, drinking, and not take part in any worldly activities. Questions and language arts. Mount Bromo. Gunung Bromo, 2,329 meters, located in the eastern Java, 112 kilometers east of the city of Surabaya, is one of the most popular and easily accessible active volcanoes in the world. Its rather unimposing, wide, and heavily eroded body rises along with 3 other smaller peaks from the center of an ancient 10-kilometer-wide volcanic caldera. The bottom of the caldera is a vast plain called the Sea of Sand. The landscape around Bromo is like the moon's surface. There are 2 ways of visiting the mountain. Some people decide to brave the cold and the reek of sulfur to meet the dawn at the top of the crater. Some, however, prefer to hire a jeep and go to the top of Gunung Penanjakan, a scenic hill 400 meters above Mount Bromo. It is the perfect spot to admire the stunning panorama of the entire caldera and the majestic, usually smoking Gunung Semeru, 3,676 meters, Java's highest mountain and one of the most dangerous Indonesian volcanoes. The bottom of the caldera is often filled with a sea of clouds that create an unforgettable, truly magical aesthetic experience. A stunning morning view of the Bromo Tengger Semeru National Park from the very popular viewpoint of Mount Penanjakan. Mount Bromo is the smallest smoking crater on the left. The one on the right, that looks like a Polish Easter cake, pictured above, is called Mount Batak. Mount Semeru is in the background.
It was around 2:30 in the morning when we left the warm and comfortable guest house in Gadisari. The night was cloudless and full of stars, so the 2-hour walk along the road towards the edge of the caldera was quite enjoyable. It was still dark when we reached the flat and wide open surface known as the Sea of Sand. The road turned into a narrow sandy path, but we didn't have to worry about where to go. The trail towards Bromo was dotted with the tiny lights of torches of the hikers as they were moving up the hill, like little ants. All we had to do was to follow them across the valley floor towards the base of the crater. The last part of the climb was a steep incline, with 250 concrete steps heading straight to the crater rim. The edge of the crater was quite narrow, with steep cliffs falling towards the inner side. There were more than 200 people sitting or standing on it, waiting for the sun to rise. Parts of the rim were covered with a dense white smoke coming from inside of the crater. It had a distinctive, sulfur-like smell, reminding me that I was standing on the top of an active volcano.
Bali. Bali. The sound of this name makes the hearts of travelers and holidaymakers begin to beat stronger. It is not a surprise that this island bewitches people from all over the world. This small piece of land, bathed unceasingly in the warm Indian Ocean waters, offers almost everything. Never-ending beaches, a wilderness of evergreen tropical forest, lazily smoking volcano cones, bottomless navy blue lakes, palm groves, fancifully winding rice paddies, and most of all, a unique culture, carefully preserved by the unusually friendly inhabitants of the island. Geography. Bali is a small, fertile island located between Java and Lombok. It is 8 to 9 degrees south of the equator, with the Java Sea to the north and the Indian Ocean to the south. Shaped like Aladdin's magic lamp, it has an area of 5,620 square kilometers, measures only 140 kilometers by 90 kilometers, and is inhabited by approximately 3 million people. Bali is famous for its beautiful landscape. The center of the island is dominated by 6 volcanic cones, between 1,350 meters and 3,014 meters high, stretching from west to east. Their slopes are covered with lush tropical forests and picturesque rice terraces, dotted with coconut palm trees and tiny shrines. The picture is completed by pristine crater lakes, fast-flowing rivers, deep ravines, and fertile vegetable and fruit gardens. There are vast, beautiful beaches along the coast, some covered with white sand and some with gray or black volcanic sand. Religion. The Balinese religion, called Hindu Dharma, is a peculiar combination of Hinduism, Buddhism, and animistic local beliefs that for centuries has not been influenced by outsiders. In the 12th century, Bali became a colony of the Kingdom of East Java, which at that time was Hindu. When that kingdom fell to its Muslim conquerors, all of the Hindu intellectuals, artists, priests, and musicians from East Java moved to Bali. Now, Bali is the only Hindu island in Indonesia. The life of the Balinese people is strongly associated with their religion. Each day begins with a small food offering in small home shrines, or even directly on the street or in front of the house. Temples are built almost everywhere, and they are dedicated to different deities, such as those protecting good harvests, spirits of the lakes, mountains, etc. Every rice paddy requires its small uba, and even the smallest village must have at least 3 temples. The Balinese people celebrate numerous festivals there. Typical features of Balinese temples are Candi Bentar, a winged gate leading to an internal courtyard, numerous altars and shrines, images of Hindu gods, auxiliary pavilions, and above all, Meru, multi-roofed towers, distant relatives of pagodas. Merus are always black and have an odd number of roofs. Those with 3 roofs are dedicated to Dewi Sri, the goddess of fertility, 5 to Ishwara, the Shiva reincarnation, 7 to Brahma, 9 to Vishnu, and finally 11 to Shiva himself. Dance. Dance is the main art form of Balinese culture and is usually performed at main temples during festivals and religious ceremonies. It is also one of the major tourist attractions of the island. Music, ballet, dance, and drama are all closely related in Bali. In fact, drama and dance are synonymous. Most dances are based on traditional local stories and are accompanied by gamelan, a Balinese orchestra, which is generally percussion-based. The subject matter is usually the opposition between the noble and the ignoble, which usually leads to conflict or war. The dances are very carefully choreographed and involve expressive gestures, moves, and facial expressions. The dancers are usually dressed in colorful traditional costumes, and some characters wear impressive masks. Every movement of the fingers, hands, wrists, neck, eyes, hips, head, knees, feet, and ankles is important and tells the story of the Balinese vision of life. Kuta. Kuta, or precisely Kuta Legian Seminyak Complex, is a bustling tourist resort along the southwestern shore of Bali. Formerly a peaceful fishing village, over the decades, Kuta has turned into an overpriced, overcrowded, and overdeveloped commercialized tourist mecca full of hotels, restaurants, bars, tattoo parlors, money changers, tourist offices, souvenir shops and stalls, and annoying street hawkers. Kuta's beautiful, wide, and sandy beach attracts hordes of excited sunseekers and surfers. Its western exposure and undisturbed horizon provide an excellent setting for captivating sunsets, especially during the wet season. A wide stretch of beach in Legian. Bali bombings. October 12, 2002 was a horrifying and tragic day in Balinese history. That night, a huge bomb exploded outside a nightclub in Kuta, killing 202 people. A further 240 people were injured. The whole world was shocked and swiftly condemned that outrageous act of terrorism. Newspapers and magazines published horrific pictures and articles. Unfortunately, 3 years later, on October 1st, 2005, the resort was struck by another deadly series of car bombs, claiming the lives of 20 people and injuring more than 100 others. To commemorate the victims of the first explosion, a permanent memorial was built on the site of Paddy's Pub on Legend Street. It is made of intricately carved stone and includes a large marble plaque which lists the names and nationalities of those killed. Questions and language arts. Uluwatu. Just south of Denpasar, Bali's largest city, is a tiny peninsula, Bukit Badang, stretching out south of Kuta. It is connected by a narrow strip of land with the mainland. Its Dutch name is Varkenshoek, which means pig snout. At its southernmost point is the small but charming Uluwatu Temple. It stands solitarily on the stone cape, hanging over a wide vertical cliff a few dozen meters above the raging waters of the ocean. Although small, the temple is one of the 6 most sacred Balinese places and is dedicated to protective sea spirits. Uluwatu attracts thousands of visitors who come here to admire spectacular sunsets and watch an enchanting Kechak dance performed in the small amphitheater on the temple grounds, located on the edge of the cliff. Mount Batur. Mount Batur, 1717 meters, is, after Mount Agung, the second most sacred mountain on Bali. Located in the northeastern part of the island, Batur rises majestically from the bottom of the huge volcanic caldera, one of the most impressive in the world. Just next to it lies the beautiful crescent-shaped Batur Lake, taking up about 1/3 of the crater's total area. Batur is still an active volcano, and the smoke is constantly seeping out of the mountain. Its first eruption in 1917 killed 1,372 people and destroyed 65,000 homes and 2,500 temples. Another major eruption occurred in 1926 and devastated the entire Batur village on the southern slopes of the volcano.
It was still quite dark when I emerged from my comfortable lodge located at the edge of the caldera. The last flickering stars were fading out, and the sky over the western side was slowly lighting up, turning its colors from red through orange into gray. Suddenly the yellow disk of the sun blinded my eyes. It was time to begin the climb. A very steep, narrow, and winding but well-maintained road connects the rim and the bottom of the crater. I didn't even want to think what would happen if the brakes of my car had failed. I passed a small village of Kedisan inhabited mainly by fishermen. A few kilometers further, I found the beginning of the narrow withering path which I hoped would take me to the top. The ascent was initially not steep. The trail was gently meandering among the rugged terrain of lava hills and furrows covered with yellowish grass and sparse bush and trees, heading for the edge of the crater bearing distinct traces of a huge explosion. The path was getting increasingly steeper and eventually brought me to the lower summit of Mount Batur. The highest point of the volcano and the rim of the huge crater was just a stone's throw away, but to get there I had to negotiate a very steep slope. The view from the top was really impressive. Lake Batur looked from here like a giant emerald, and I was able to see all of the island's major volcanoes, including the perfect cone of Gunung Agung, the Balinese Everest.
A young Balinese student comes back from school in the beautifully terraced village of Jatilui, which means truly marvelous. Lombok. Geography. Lombok, which means chili pepper in Javanese, is a small, roughly circular island located to the east of Bali. Its main geographical feature is a mountain range of 13 peaks that culminate in the volcanic Mount Rinjani at 3,726 meters. The deep and narrow trench of Lombok Strait, separating the island from the east, marks the Wallace Line, the distinctive climatic, zoological, and botanical division between two regions that are respectively associated with Asia and Australia. To the west of the line, fauna is more Asian. To its east, it more closely resembles the Australian fauna. Majestic Mount Rinjani and its beautiful crater lake. Trekking in Gunung Rinjani National Park. At a respectable 3,726 meters, Gunung Rinjani is the highest mountain on Lombok and the third highest in Indonesia. Rinjani is an active volcano that is protected by Gunung Rinjani National Park, established in 1997. The main geographical feature of the park is a huge volcanic caldera created over millions of years of dramatic explosions and erosion. The 6-kilometer by 8.5-kilometer oval-shaped caldera is partially filled with a lake called Segara Anak, Child of the Sea. The recent violent eruptions of 1994, 1995, and 1996 have formed a small cone in the center of the caldera. That cone is an active mini-volcano called Gunung Baru, or New Mountain, 2,363 meters, later renamed Gunung Baru Jari, or New Finger Mountain. The most recent eruption of Gunung Rinjani occurred in late May 2010, just over 2 months before my visit to the Gunung Rinjani National Park. Gunung Rinjani, as photographed from Senaru, the starting point for trek in the park. The sign marking the entrance to Rinjani National Park, at 600 meters.
The trek in Gunung Rinjani National Park usually starts in Senaru, a small village on the northern slopes of the volcano. At the park headquarters, we met our guide and porters, collected drinking water, and after a short briefing, finally hit the trail. The first part was relatively easy. The path, quite wide and clear at first, gently climbed through the dense evergreen tropical rainforest. The tree canopy was so thick that very little sunshine was able to reach the forest floor I was walking on. The forest was rich in wildlife, and I could clearly hear some birds singing and see many monkeys happily playing in the trees. The easy part was soon over, and the trail turned into steep, bumpy, narrow steps. Shortly after the lunch break, at around 1,600 meters, the weather suddenly deteriorated, and the forest, much thicker then, was embraced with a mystical veil of mist. Soon the mist changed into rain, and finally into a terrible downpour that turned the path into a stream. Unfortunately, there was nowhere to hide, so we decided to continue our climb towards a small shelter at 2,000 meters. Finally, the rain stopped and the clouds began to break. Eventually, the forest gave way to shrubs, grass, and single trees that looked mysterious in the clouds. The path, by then very steep and narrow, zigzagged along a grassy ridge leading directly to the rim. The trail was not easy to negotiate, as it was made of dark brown, loose volcanic ash heavily bruised by rainwater. The climb was quite strenuous. 2 steps uphill were usually followed by 1 slide downhill. Finally, 7 hours since the beginning of the climb, we reached the camp, just below the crater rim. I put my backpack down and could finally look around. The place was truly magical. My tent was pitched on a small platform a few meters below the rocky outcrop. The valley down below was filled with a sea of clouds, a flowing grayish smooth mass broken occasionally by some of the smaller peaks which like small islands peaked above the sea. The sun was already hidden behind the horizon, and the sky was beautifully decorated with ribbons of silky clouds, exquisitely painted in the magical colors of the setting sun. It was getting darker, and the astounding natural spectacle was coming to an end. The first twinkling stars appeared in the sky. The wind was picking up, and it was time to crawl into the warmth of my tent for a well-deserved rest. It was already bright when I woke up in the morning. The sky was almost clear, and only a few clouds anchored near the horizon were lit by the first warm yellowish rays of the rising sun. I emerged from my tent, grabbed my camera, and rushed quickly to the nearest viewpoint at the edge of the crater. I looked on the other side to see the truly jaw-dropping but highly anticipated sight, the famous Segara Anak Lake at the bottom of the gigantic caldera. The crater was still torpid in the shade as the diluted sun rays were barely touching the highest parts of the rim. A few minutes later, the blazing disk of the sun appeared from behind the crater edge. It was immediately warm, and the colors began to change. As the morning sun gently kissed the lake, awakened in 1,000 shades of blue and green. What a sight! The trail down to the lake was not only incredibly spectacular, but also quite exciting. The walls of the crater were nearly vertical, and the narrow and exposed path was equipped with ropes and metal bolts for safety. 2 hours later, I reached the lake's shore. The name Segara Anak means child of the sea, and during that time of the day it indeed looked blue like the sea. For local people, the lake is considered sacred. It holds various mysteries and invisible power. For me, with the clouds maundering along its slopes and the surface, the lake looked mysterious indeed. The second part of the day was an extremely strenuous 3-hour climb to the crater rim on the other side of the mountain. The narrow, zigzagging path was partially extremely steep and knee-demanding. The last part was an easy stroll along the wide, gentle ridge before reaching the camp at 2,700 meters. The view was spectacular. The valley below was filled with a soft bed of clouds that cushioned the sapphire lake. The third day greeted us with a beautiful sunrise spectacle. The camp was nearly deserted in the morning as many people had left it at night, hoping to reach the top of Ringiani at sunrise. Shortly after breakfast we set out for a very long descent. The eastern slopes of the volcano receive much less rainfall than the northern ones and therefore are covered with dry, grassy savanna. The trail, steep at first, quite gently rolled across wide open spaces, crossed a few deep river gorges, and delivered me back to civilization.
Questions and language arts. Flores. Geography. A bean-like shaped Flores Island is one of the Lesser Sunda Islands located between Sumbawa and Timor. With its 15 perfectly shaped, lazily smoking volcanoes, 3 different colored lakes of Kelimutu that can change colors from time to time, rugged terrain with razor-cut narrow ridges, pristine empty beaches, spectacular river canyons, and green tropical vegetation, Flores is considered as one of the most beautiful islands in Indonesia. A dark volcanic beach near Ende. Iniri Volcano. History. Flores has a very long history that goes back to prehistoric times. In fact, the island was inhabited by Homo floresiensis that lived in its western part 12,000 years ago. The first Europeans arrived on Flores in the mid-16th century. They were Portuguese missionaries who sailed to the remote islands of Indonesia looking for spices. One of the early explorers, fascinated by the beauty of underwater gardens near the eastern coast, called it Cabo das Flores, Cape of Flowers, giving the island its present name. The Portuguese recognized the location of the island as strategically ideal and built a fort on the neighboring island of Salor in 1566. Due to its much drier climate, it turned out to be heaven for sailors compared to malarial Timor. The fortress served as a base for the first Catholic mission in the region that later extended their area of activity into Flores. In the 17th century, Dutch missionaries arrived. They converted tens of thousands of the people to Catholicism. Nowadays, a Catholic church stands as the central point of almost every village, and over 50% of the Flores population is Catholic.
It was September 1993. I was on board a small plane traveling between Bali and Momere, the capital and the largest city on Flores. I was seriously worried what I would find there. Do you wonder why? Merely a few months before, in December 1992, Momere was struck by a massive 7.8 magnitude earthquake, followed by a catastrophic tsunami and a series of several serious aftershocks. A huge 25-meter high tsunami took everything that stood in its way, sweeping trees, cars, houses, and its residents away, almost instantly turning a 70,000 city into a pile of rubble. About 90% of the buildings were destroyed, 2,500 people were killed, and tens of thousands were made homeless. Several hours later, while strolling around the city, I was personally able to witness the extent of the devastation. Many buildings were still not rebuilt and served as a reminder of the tragic day. I also saw a group of people standing in front of a huge statue of Jesus, praying for the loved ones that had perished that day. The next day, I went to a damaged church several kilometers away from Momere to visit a Polish missionary. The priest told me about the horror of the earthquake and his efforts to help the people affected by it. Flores is one of the most seismically active areas on the planet, and even 9 months after the tragedy, minor aftershocks were still affecting the region. I was about to learn it the hard way. Just before dawn, during my second night in Momere, I heard some suspicious noises and a dog barking outside my hotel room. A few minutes later, I felt distinctive shocks and furniture began to move. Everything lasted only a few seconds, but it really scared me. It was an earthquake, the first I had experienced in my life. I jumped out of my bed and ran out to the garden, but it was all over by then. Traveling on Flores was quite an experience. The island is only 360 kilometers long and 12 to 70 kilometers wide, but the main road, the Trans-Flores Highway, connecting Larantuka on the eastern coast and Labuhambajo in the west, is more than 700 kilometers long. The bus station in Momere was not very impressive. It was just a parking lot and a small building with a shop selling food to passengers. All the buses traveling on Flores are actually small 20-seat minibuses. Roads are so narrow, they cannot accommodate regular buses. I already had a ticket, but the bus with the name that was written on it had not arrived yet. Many other vehicles had left already, but my fellow passengers waited patiently, without worry, and confidently said that the bus would eventually come. In fact, it did, but almost fully packed with sacks of clothes. They filled the whole interior and covered the roof in several layers. Fortunately, there was enough room for me, but I did not expect the journey to be comfortable. Indeed, the road was narrow, bumpy, and very winding, making the journey not only uncomfortable, but also painstakingly slow. As a reward for my patience and endurance, the views outside the narrow bus windows were incredibly beautiful. The road, like a giant snake with never-ending serpentine curves, wound amongst evergreen tropical vegetation, climbing steep slopes of smoking volcanoes or descending to the bottoms of deep valleys with raging rivers. The stunning nature was dotted with small settlements, some of them destroyed by the earthquake. What a ride! It was 4 o'clock in the morning when a small girl woke me up knocking on the door. I had no choice but to get up quickly if I wanted to be on time for the famous spectacle on the top of the mountain. The moment was magical. The cloudless sky was full of tiny stars that, like little diamonds, twinkled above my head. It wasn't completely dark, however, as the moon in its full form helped illuminate a clear path that took me through a pine forest and across the plateau leading to the summit. The last part of the climb was quite steep, but I had no problems getting to the top. I took a deep breath. The strong, acrid scent of sulfur reminded me that I was on the volcano. It was very cold and windy, but I was patiently waiting for the spectacle that was about to begin. The sky first turned red, then orange, then yellow, and finally the sun rose over the clouds hanging up on the horizon. The scenery was really overwhelming. There were mountains all around, separated by deep valleys still in the shade. It was getting bright quickly, and soon I was able to get a good look around. The view stretching beneath my feet was truly amazing. 3 round volcanic craters lay beneath my feet, all filled with 3 different colored lakes. The eastern lake was black and occupied the deepest crater with vertical walls. The western lakes were turquoise and green and filled 2 neighboring craters divided by a narrow strip. Apparently, only a couple of years earlier, they were blue, brown, and black respectively. In 1930, the colors were the same as today, and in 1960, blue, red-brown, and coffee-like. Residents of neighboring villages have their own myths and legends concerning the lakes. According to them, the souls of deceased people go to the volcano after death and submerge in the water. Souls of young people go to the warm green lake, those of the old ones go to the turquoise lake, and finally souls of murderers and thieves go to the black lake. How do the souls know which lake they should choose? The legends do not explain.
Ngada region. The Ngada are one of the most unique ethnic groups on Flores Island. They live on the slopes of the Inari volcano and on the adjacent plateau. The Ngada are well known for their unique, well-preserved culture, customs, and traditional architecture. Almost all Ngada people are Roman Catholic, but at the same time, they also practice their ancient animistic beliefs. The 2 most characteristic elements of Ngada culture are ngadu and baga. Ngadu are similar to umbrellas in structure, consisting of a 3-meter-long stick and a reedy roof. A baga is a miniature of a house with a steep roof. Both structures are supposed to the presence of ancestors. The ngadu is always masculine, and baga feminine, and each pair belongs to a particular family group living in the village. Baina is the most typical and best preserved of all villages in the area. It consists of 2 rows of houses with tall, steep, rectangular roofs supported by 2 sticks. Some of the roofs are topped with a small statue of a man, often with a headband, holding a parang, machete, in one hand and a spear in the other one. There is an empty space between the 2 rows of houses, containing several ngadu, baga, and some mysterious megalithic structures. These structures are believed to be the tombs of the ancestors of the contemporary inhabitants of the village, who came from Java and settled down here about 3 centuries ago. Women from Bena are mainly engaged with weaving multicolored fabrics, known as ikats, one of the main sources of income in the village, while most of the men are occupied with fieldwork. Bena, the traditional Ngada village, located on the slopes of the perfect cone of Iniri volcano. The main square of Bena village. Iniri volcano. Komodo.
Komodo is one of the small islands located between Sumbawa and Flores. The island has a rugged and hilly landscape with secluded sandy bays framed by soaring volcanic cliffs. As you can see from the aerial picture, there is not much green vegetation growing there, and in fact, it is one of the driest places in entire Indonesia, with a distinctive 8-month-long hot and dry season, and occasional heavy monsoon rains during the rest of the year. Komodo, together with Rinca, Padar, and numerous smaller islands, are famous for its unique ecosystem, and Komodo National Park, established in 1980. It was declared a World Heritage Site and a Man and Biosphere Reserve by UNESCO in 1986. The park's best-known protected inhabitants are the famous Komodo dragons, Varanus komodoensis, the world's largest known lizards.
Komodo dragon. The Komodo dragon is the largest living species of lizard, growing to an average length of 2 to 3 meters and weighing around 70 kilograms. It is an ancient species whose Asian ancestors date back over 40 million years. It then moved to Australia and evolved to its present form over 4 million years ago. Like most of the larger reptilian species, the Komodo lives long, with an estimated life expectancy of over 50 years in the wild. It has an excellent sense of smell and can detect rotting carcasses from distances as great as 10 kilometers. Komodo dragons are carnivores, and their diet includes deer, boar, wild buffalo, snakes, reptiles, and small mammals. The Komodo is a stealth predator. When hunting, it lies motionless and camouflaged, waiting for its prey. Questions and language arts.
Sulawesi.
Geography. Formerly known as Celebes, Sulawesi is one of the most precious gems of the Indonesian archipelago. Unusually shaped like petals of a giant orchid or a lowercase letter K, Sulawesi is the world's 11th largest island. Its shape of 5 connected peninsulas with little to hold them together was created by a collision of multiple tectonic plates originating from Asia, Australia, and the Pacific Islands. The central part of the island is ruggedly mountainous, with steep mountains, deep gorges, and fast-flowing rivers. Its geographical remoteness and relative inaccessibility helped Sulawesi to create and sustain one of the most bizarre and unusual cultures of the modern world, Torajan. Makassar. Makassar, or Ujung Pandang, is a big modern city and the capital of South Sulawesi province. The coastal and lowland regions of the province are mainly inhabited by remarkable people, the proud and outspoken Buginese. They are well known for their sailing and shipbuilding skills and are believed to have lived here for over 1,000 years. Today's Makassar is a 1.5 million bustling, sprawling modern city and a business center for the entire eastern Indonesia. It is also an important port and a fishing center. Makassar is also a gateway to East Indonesia, as well as an entry point for adventurous tours to the Mamasa and Tana Toraja highlands, which will be described on the following pages of the book. Once described as the best preserved Dutch fort in Asia, Fort Rotterdam was built around 1667 and was a center of Dutch colonial power in Sulawesi. Tana Toraja. Right in the middle of the rugged peaks and fertile plateaus of South Sulawesi lies Tana Toraja, or the land of heavenly kings. Some Torajan people believe that their ancestors descended from heaven onto a mountain some 20 generations ago. The name Toraja was originally given by the Buginese and means people of the high country. This beautiful, vast, and relatively unspoiled region is the center of an incredible culture and people whose customs and way of life have evolved and changed little over centuries. So, welcome to Tana Toraja, one of the most fascinating regions of Indonesia. Culture and architecture. One of the most striking features of Torajan culture are tongkanan, their spectacular family houses. They have a distinguishing boat-shaped and oversized saddleback roof. Like most of Indonesia's traditional architecture, tongkanan are built on stilts. The word tongkanan comes from the Toraja word tongkon, to sit, and literally means the place where family members meet. According to the Torajan myth, the first tongkanan house was built by their first ancestor, the creator, who descended to Earth. Another legend describes the Torajan arriving from the north by boats, and when a fierce storm hit them, their boats were so badly damaged that they used them as roofs for their new houses. All the tongkonan houses face north, the direction the Torajan ancestors came from. The placenta of each child born in the house is buried under the east side of the house, the direction of the rising sun. The living area is significantly smaller when compared to the roof, and as most daily life activities take place outside the house, the dark, cramped interior is intended for sleeping, storage, meetings, and occasionally protection. The walls of tongkonans are exquisitely ornamented with carved symbolic, geometric motifs with the use of the four sacred Torajan colors of white, red, yellow, and black. The spectacular tall gables that draw everyone's attention are typically decorated with buffalo horns, symbols of fertility, prosperity, strength, and protection from evil, and each set represents a past funeral. The Torajan are probably best known for their unique, elaborate funeral traditions. When a Torajan dies in Toraja land, family members of the deceased are required to hold a series of funeral ceremonies before the deceased is brought to a funeral site for burial. The richer and more powerful the person, the more expensive the funeral is. When a person dies, his or her body is cleansed, the intestines are removed, and the corpse injected with formalin. The body is neatly dressed, wrapped in drapes, and covered with expensive material. The deceased is not buried immediately, but is stored in a tongkonan, under the same roof with his or her family. Torajans consider the person to be merely suffering from an illness and not truly dead until the moment of the funeral, when the first buffalo is sacrificed. Only then their spirit can begin its journey to the land of souls. There may be a long time between the death and the funeral, and sometimes a person can be dead for more than 10 years until the family saves enough money to hold the ceremony. There are 3 methods of burial. The coffin may be laid in a cave, or in a carved stone grave, or hung on a cliff. The coffins contain any possessions that the deceased might need in the afterlife. The burial sites, especially those in the caves, contain unique wood-carved effigies called tau-tau. The word tau is a Torajan word meaning man, and tau-tau meaning men or statue. The tau-tau are representatives of the deceased. At first they were simply carved, only to show the gender, but over time have become more and more elaborate, actually attempting to imitate the likeness of the deceased persons.
My travel diary. A feast for the deceased. The main reason for coming to Tana Toraja, apart from admiring its stunning scenery and exquisite architecture, was to attend one of the famous funeral rituals. When we arrived at Rantepao, a pleasant town and a center of Torajan culture, we were pleased to learn that such a ceremony was planned to begin the following day. Although funerals are usually family events, in Toraja tourists and other visitors are welcome to attend as long as they bring a small gift and do not disturb the family of the deceased. So, the next morning, equipped with a large box of kratik, popular Indonesian cigarettes, we set off for a short minibus ride. The vehicle stopped in the middle of a rice field, and the rest of the journey had to be done on foot, following a narrow, muddy path winding around the paddies. Although we didn't know where to go, the path was busy with small groups of people carrying different objects, assumingly going to the same place. 30 minutes later, we reached a small settlement set attractively at the edge of a bamboo grove. Many guests had already arrived, but dozens more were still coming from different directions. There were two tall, elegant tongkonens in the village, along with a few other smaller houses, all decorated with long red ribbons. A sandalwood coffin, wrapped in a red ornamented glittering death shroud and topped with a traditional tongkonen roof, stood in the middle of the main square, which would serve as the ceremonial field called Rante. Guests, mostly dressed in black, patiently waited for the ceremony to begin, eating and drinking food distributed by diligently bustling waiters. Female family members and children were dressed in traditional Torajan red costumes, and each of them held a golden kris, a wooden replica of an Indonesian dagger. Apparently, their job was to greet officials and more important guests invited for the ceremony. I sat down on the stairs leading to the Tongkonan and looked around as more guests arrived. As the deceased was a wealthy upper-class individual, the ceremony was supposed to be an expensive event, adequate for his position in society. It took over 2 years for the family to save enough money for the funeral. Therefore, many of the arriving guests showed up carrying big dark pigs, scrupulously attached to bamboo sticks. The animals, obviously not very happy with their situation, squealed loudly while being put on the ground. That day, over 20 pigs were provided by the family or brought by guests, all to be slaughtered and consumed during the 3-day-long feast. A few minutes later, a group of 40 men surrounded the coffin, and the ceremony was about to begin. Some men were dressed in blue-black t-shirts and black sarongs. I had a feeling that they were employed by the family to help perform some ceremonial duties. Suddenly they formed a circle, held each other's hands, and began to sing a monotonous chant, or the mournful tune, known locally as Mabadong. I found the chant quite a disturbing experience that gave me goosebumps. The chant was repeated several times during the ceremony. The slaughtering of water buffaloes is the most important part of the funeral ritual. The more powerful the person who dies, the more buffaloes are slaughtered at the death feast. The animals are usually provided by the family of the deceased, and their official presentation is an important part of the ceremony. That day, 16 buffaloes were brought to the main square. Torajans believe that the deceased will need the buffaloes to make their journey to the afterlife, and the greater the number of mammals that are sacrificed, the faster they can get there. One of the animals was taken away to a smaller square behind the main building, attached to a small picket, and killed by a stab to the heart with a dagger. The first buffalo of the funeral was duly sacrificed. In the meantime, some pigs were slaughtered and prepared for consumption. The coffin's roof was then removed, and the coffin, with some struggle, was put on the first floor of the building for display. For the next 20 minutes or so, a professional eulogist gave a pompous speech praising the virtues and achievements of the departed person. The ceremony then moved to the main square. The men in blue t-shirts formed a circle, and the poignant tune of the chant spread around the village again. Finally, the family and guests walked in a silent procession and proceeded to one of the buildings for a feast. We thought that it was a good time to leave and walked back to the car. The second phase of the ceremony took place on the following 2 days. Feasting and chanting continued all night, followed by buffalo fights during the day. The coffin was loaded on a truck and, along with the family and guests, driven a few kilometers to the family graveside. After unloading, the coffin was carried in a procession to the actual burial site. The grave was carved inside a huge rock and enclosed by a modern 2-story structure. The coffin was placed in front of the grave, and the last ritual began. So far, the funeral was purely based on Torajan animistic beliefs, but since they are officially Christian, the final part was conducted by a priest. After a short service, the coffin was lifted on the especially built wide bamboo ladder and placed inside the grave. Mr. Randan Batu could finally rest in peace and begin his journey to Puya, or the land of souls. Later on, the Tauta will be placed, and from that moment on, he will guard his descendants.
Questions and language arts. Mamasa Valley. Mamasa is large mountain village and a remote fertile valley located in the middle of South Sulawesi, approximately 100 kilometers from the coastline. Mamasa is renowned for its spectacular, mostly untouched landscape and its 1,400-meter-high mountains, abundant tropical rainforest, and interesting traditional hill tribe villages that make it an ideal place for trekking. There is only one narrow and bumpy access road to the valley, which is frequently washed away by torrential rains. As a result, the area is fairly inaccessible and therefore much less visited than the neighboring Tana Toraja. Inhabitants of Mamasa Valley are incredibly friendly, and smiles greet visitors at almost every corner. People of the Mamasa Valley. Culture and architecture. The culture of Mamasa Valley is quite similar to that of Tana Toraja. However, there are some distinctive differences between them. Mamasan ceremonies and funeral rites are not as elaborate or ostentatious as Torajan, and although they still involve some animal offerings, they are not as bloody as those performed by their better-known eastern neighbors. People of Mamasa also build their own splendid tongkonans, resembling a ship, but their houses and rice barns are less soaring and much heavier than their Torajan counterparts. The picture below shows the interior of a typical home. The rooms, only accessible by a steep and narrow ladder, are dark and cramped with furniture. An old family picture of the house owner in Rantai Buddha. The owner of the home inside his tongkonan in Rantai Buddha. A small village of Rantai Buddha contains one of the best preserved Mamasan tongkonans in the valley. Buntu Bala Village. Buntu Bala is a traditional settlement located 15 kilometers from Mamasa. The whole village is situated on the top of a ridge amidst lush green tropical vegetation. There are over 200 traditional tongkonans lined up next to each other. Some of the roofs are still covered with a thatch, but many have changed into more durable but ugly corrugated metal sheets. Life goes very slowly in Buntu Bala. There were not too many people in the village at the time of my visit, as many were probably engaged with the fieldwork. There were some children playing around, mothers feeding their newborn children, women weaving traditional blankets, and elderly people sitting in front of their homes. A few kilometers before the village of Buntubala, on the top of a small hill overlooking a fertile valley, lies an old Tedong Tedong burial site. The graves, supposedly a few hundred years old, are sheltered under a huge Tonkanon ship-shaped roof that protects them from the elements. The site consists of a dozen or so traditional solid wooden coffins, with one end the shape of a buffalo and the other resembling a horse. Each coffin contains skulls and bones of several people mixed together in a helter-skelter manner. Mamasa Monday Market. Monday is a very special day for Mamasa Valley. That day, hundreds of people from all over the region come to the village main market to sell mainly locally produced goods. What can be found there? There are piles of colorful woven blankets, clothes, fruit, vegetables, fish and other seafood, rice and other grains, spices, and even live roosters, especially trained for cockfighting, all neatly and attractively displayed. Hiking in Mamasa Valley.
With its stunning mountain scenery, interesting culture, a good network of trails, and exceptionally friendly people, Mamasa Valley is a perfect, adventurous hiking destination. Some of the trails can be quite misleading and even treacherous, so finding a good local guide is essential. Bearing that in mind, we hired an experienced local man who had claimed to know the area very well. Everything seemed to be going as planned. The weather was good, the trail wide and comfortable, and the views fantastic. In the village of Kola, we decided to take a shortcut. The trail turned into a very narrow, slippery path that very steeply dropped to the valley floor, filled with different layers of rice paddies. Luckily, we managed to find small bamboo bridges to cross the fast-flowing streams. There was no clear path, and we had no choice but to walk on the narrow, swampy, slippery ridges dividing the rice paddies. Our guide had no idea where to go, and we had to retreat several times. 2 hours later, dirty and exhausted, we reached a small village and a good road that brought us back to Mamasa.
Questions and language arts. Jasik's travel diary.
In my opinion, cuisine is one of the most important elements of local culture, and a visit to any place in the world cannot be complete without trying local specialties. Additionally, eating good food is fun, especially when you dine with somebody like my friend Marek, who browses the internet and reads books before traveling, eager to learn about dishes, drinks, and restaurants. When he finds a place to eat, he jumps up and down like a little boy who has received his favorite toy. He talks to waiters and sometimes even goes to the kitchen to watch food preparations. During our trip to Sulawesi, we were able to try some extraordinary local dishes. The upper picture shows one of the North Sulawesi signature dishes called kumi kumi rika rika. It's squid cooked with delicious chili sauce made of small chilies that have a unique orangey flavor. The lower picture shows a typical Tana Toraja dish called kerbau pamarasan, which is buffalo meat cooked in Toraja black spice. It's a bit hard and chewy, but quite original. Another well-known dish is called papyong, and it's meat cooked with vegetables and coconut milk in a bamboo stick. The famous Rantapau livestock market is a place not to be missed. The only animals sold there are buffaloes and pigs, as these animals are sacrificed during the funerals. The buffaloes were huge, and some of them, and had big horns. The locals controlled the buffaloes with a ring through their nose. Walking around those beasts was a scary experience. There were also hundreds of pigs tidily strapped to bamboo frames, all lined up ready to be transported. As most of the people in Toraja use motorcycles, the frames with pigs are just simply attached to the boot at the back of the bike.
Mamasa schoolchildren on their way home.
Happiness cannot come from without. It must come from within. It is not what we see and touch or that which others do for us which makes us happy. It is that which we think and feel and do, first for the other fellow and then for ourselves. Helen Keller.
Jacek Pivovarczyk and Cynthia Lee. English in My Backpack. Volume 4. Indonesia. Buddhist Fat Ho Memorial College. 2011.